How do you introduce a writer as prolific as today's commencement speaker? Well, one way you can do it is to see what other folks have written about him. In some of the introductions and bios on Steve Eubanks, they sound like this. One is simple and straightforward. This is his listing on Muckrack. Author, editor, speaker, columnist, Christian. More about that Christian part in just a minute. Penguin Random House, the publisher of a number of his books, states, Steve Eubanks is a best-selling author and award-winning journalist whose work has appeared in Sports Illustrated, Golf Digest, and Golf Magazine, as well as FoxSports.com. He has authored or co-authored 30 books, including collaborations with sports greats such as Arnold Palmer, Lou Holtz, and Ty Murray. He lives in Peachtree City, Georgia. His women's golf bio gets a little bit more creative. Steve Eubanks is a New York Times best-selling author and award-winning columnist, a former college golfer at the University of Georgia. He is now happy with his 4 handicap, his senior golfer status, and the fact his daughter beats him and outdrives him on a regular basis. But perhaps for our purposes today, it could be this one. Peter Parisi wrote about Steve this way in an article from this past summer in the Daily Wire. Earlier this month, the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation sent out emails soliciting nominations for its 2023 Profile Encourage Awards. The yearly awards honors individuals who demonstrate politically courageous leadership in the spirit of Profiles of Courage, Encourage, the Pulitzer Prize-winning 1956 book of the same name by John F. Kennedy. Although he's not a politician as such, I nonetheless nominate for one of this year's Profile Encourage Awards one Steve Eubanks, who quit his job in protest as a senior writer for Global Golf Post after his editors refused to publish an article based on an interview with pro golfer Amy Olson. The last part is what got my attention and introduced me to Steve Eubanks more formally earlier this year. After researching Steve, I noticed that I knew several of the books he had written, especially All-American, Two Young Men, the 2001 Army-Navy game, and the war they fought in Iraq. And being a sports fan and a golf fan, but a terrible golfer, I was certain that I had recognized his writing before. Because being an aficionado of good writers, and especially sports writers, and as one who's been fortunate enough to dabble in writing myself, I knew Steve was an amazing writer, and I had seen his work. Well, Steve's not just a great writer, he's a gifted writer with purpose. I invited Steve to Zoom in and share his life lessons with my class this past semester, and it was clear that Steve's Christian faith has been and remains a powerful influence in his life, and it frequently shows up in the most simplest of ways in his own writing, but with remarkable clarity and poignancy. For example, this line, sometimes greatness is just that simple. Sometimes greatness is just that simple. Steve wrote books and was fortunate to have a personal relationship with the legendary Arnold Palmer. What was that simplicity that Steve wrote about that Arnold Palmer inspired him to think? Well, it was writing about Arnold Palmer in this way. Mr. Palmer could frequently be found in his workshop grinding the flange on a wedge. He could be found at the shop where they keep all of the golf carts, sanding brake shoes on a golf cart, or playing golf with 2 bags and between 40 to 60 golf clubs so he could analyze each and every one. And as Steve said, whether it's sanding brake shoes, fixing a flange, or using multiple golf clubs when you're already known as one of the greatest golfers ever, sometimes greatness is just that simple. Or this line, our very existence demands a level of gratitude. Our very existence demands a level of gratitude. Steve wrote in an article comparing famous golf pro Phil Mickelson, who was on the verge of receiving $200 million from the Saudi Arabia-backed LIV, and he was complaining about his pay with the PGA. And Steve compared that with LPGA golfer Allie Ewing, who said this, and I quote, It's wonderful that the LPGA can add a tournament like this. We are truly blessed to be able to be here and do this. Our very existence demands a level of gratitude. But perhaps the best way to describe Steve Eubanks, he's just a good guy. A good guy whom God blessed, improved, and provided the opportunity for him to share his gifts as a best-selling author and one of golf's best sports writers. That's what several of my faculty colleagues and I and our students heard earlier in class this semester. And that's also why, after graduation services this morning, we will be presenting Steve with the Presidential Award for Exceptional Achievement at a special luncheon. This award recognizes individuals who share Judson's commitment to positive values and have been a positive reflection of those values, and they have achieved significant accomplishments in areas such as their personal life, professional life, spiritual life, or community service, and Steve has done all of those. We are pleased to have Steve's wife, Debbie, here with us today. He and Debbie are the proud parents of 5 boys and 1 daughter and 12 grandchildren. Please welcome our commencement speaker, Mr. Steve Eubanks.
My goodness, I'm not sure how to follow that up, but congratulations, graduates. I got to tell you, as the guy with the grayest hair in the building, it really warms my heart to see so many non-traditional graduates here, the parents and grandparents. So I know your life's been different. You haven't had the traditional college experience, but it's just wonderful to see you up here. You know, it's also wonderful because I'm a non-traditional commencement speaker. For starters, this is my real voice. I am not faking this accent. I know there are a lot of people, particularly in media, who go to various things to get this sort of thing softened, but I haven't done that, obviously. Also, I don't have, as many of these folks do, PhD or JD or MD or DD or DMin or any of those things behind my name. The only letters I have behind my name, my kids put there. It was OMG and LOL and SMH, which stands for shaking my head. I didn't know that one. My favorite is PDST, which not PTSD, although I do give them that, but it's PDST, which stands for please don't say that. I get that a lot, and I actually think they made that up. But I speak to you today about something that graduates, I know you don't want to talk about today, and it's tests. I know, I heard the groans already. Can you believe it? You just finished your finals. The last thing you want to talk about is another test. And I promise you, you could probably go through the rest of the day without one. But another one's coming. And one of the reasons that I chose the passage that I did today about the widow at the temple is because it's such a commonly known story. Probably from the time you went to your first Sunday school class, you heard that. It's one of the first things we ever learned. We know it so well that we have a visual in our minds of what that probably looked like. But what do we really know about that person? Well, widow and poor. It's about all we know. We assume she's older because her husband's dead. But that's not necessarily the case. I mean, this was first century Judea. Young men died a lot. And we know she was poor. But not poor the way we think of poor. We're all Elon Musk compared to those people in the first century. So, and compared to 99% of the people on earth now. So there was a level of poverty that we really can't appreciate. So when she put everything she had in the plate that day, that was a real risk. And it was a test. And I think we overlook that a lot of times, particularly, look, when you go back and you read a lot of the Levitican laws and trust me, you're reading that going, wait a minute, what are they talking about here? We're cutting up animals and we're burning them on an altar and we're, the sheep, the goat without blemish. And you're sort of like, I'm not sure I get all of this. Well, and rightly so. I mean, if somebody walked through that door right now and slaughtered a goat in the aisle, we would all be rightly horrified. But what we forget is this was a test. This was a risk, because a goat was milk. Sheep were wool. A cow was enough protein to keep your family alive in a harsh winter. When those people offered that sacrifice, this wasn't just some material giving. They were risking their lives based on their faith. So why am I here? I'm a sports writer, guy speaks a little differently than the rest of you. Well, I'm here because, as Gene pointed out, 1 year ago, my life was about as good as it could get. I had really achieved everything professionally that I had ever wanted. My kids were grown. My grandkids loved me. And I was hanging out with athletes and actors and rock stars and really just kind of enjoying myself. I would go to sporting events and write about it. I had a guy ask me one time, "Hey, I'd like to talk to you about your retirement plan." I'm like, "What would I retire to?" And then all of a sudden, a friend of mine, Amy Olson, qualified to play in the U.S. Women's Open. It's the biggest women's golf event in the world, while she was 7 months pregnant. And I said, "Wow, that's an interesting story. I think I'll call Amy and talk to her about it." So as we're in the course of having the interview, she took it in a direction that I could not have imagined, where she talked about how difficult it is today to be an open Christian in professional sports, how difficult it is to deal with the media and talk about your faith. And she was very, very prolific in talking about how difficult it is to be pregnant and to talk about the sanctity of life in today's environment. Well, I got to tell you, as a journalist, my legs started shaking because that was news. And so whether or not you agreed with Amy, and look, you may not, but the fact that you have a newsmaker saying something like that should definitely get your journalistic antenna up. So I wrote it up exactly as she said it, submitted it, and to my surprise, within minutes, I received a call from the editor and publisher saying, "Yeah, look, we have some staff members who are really sort of going nuts that we would consider publishing something like this. And the only way this will be published is if we take out the pro-life and Christian stuff." I'll tell you, I knew immediately that I had to resign. There was really no other option. And so I did so right away. And look, that sounds like a test, and it was to some extent. The big one came about 3 weeks later because word filtered out. And I have to tell you, graduates, word always filters out. Nothing ever remains a secret forever, so just keep that in mind. So I start getting calls for interviews about what had happened. I could have very easily offered a no comment. I could have very quietly gone away. What message does that send? That I am not willing to do what Amy was willing to do and put the word out front. And so I said yes to every interview, knowing full well the backlash that would come. I didn't have 15 minutes of fame, more like about 7.5. But for a while there, I was in the news quite a bit. And as I knew would happen, suddenly my phone calls don't get answered. And now my emails don't get returned. And all of those people that I kind of felt like I was close to and that I had developed relationships with now see me as controversial, someone to sort of be avoided. I knew it was coming. This is not something that caught me by surprise. In fact, one of the people who actually criticized me said out loud, "Hey, I don't think you really appreciated the gravity of what you've done or the consequences for what you've done." And while I appreciate that person being honest with me, they're wrong. I knew exactly what I was doing, and I knew exactly what was coming. And I have to tell you, graduates, That's the test. Because 2, maybe 3 times in your life, you're going to be faced with a very black and white moral choice. There's going to be no question what the right answer is. But the right answer is going to cost you. And it might cost you big. And you got to ask yourself, are you ready? Now, look, I don't want you to think for a second that I'm in any way comparing myself to the widow at the temple. I am certainly not. If there's any biblical character I would compare myself with, it's Peter when he's on his knees saying, "Go away from me, Lord, I am a sinful man." But that's really about it. But we do have a couple of things in common. One is we were both later in life tested. And the other thing is, this is a promise that I can make to you. You will remember this day for the rest of your life. You will remember where you sat. You will remember who came. You will remember all of the sights of this, because it's one of those seminal moments. It'll be implanted in your brain. But just like the woman in the temple, a month from now, you are not going to remember my name. You might not remember it by dinner tonight. That seemed like a nice enough guy. I'm sorry, what was his name again? But that's okay, because we aren't important. The widow's name is not important, and my name is not important. The lesson is important. Tests are coming. What are you willing to risk? You willing to risk friendship? You willing to risk a job? You willing to give all that you have? Thank you. Congratulations again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eubank.